This is the Black Sheepdog, broadcasting to you from the vast and mysterious depths of cyberspace, bringing to you a message of truth and hope. Today we consider part 3 of our series, Abortion, the Truth, and the Hope, the social and political consequences of abortion. And these are profound, and they are many. The battle between pro-life and so-called pro-choice combatants has been bitter, and it couldn't be anything but that considering the nature of the battle. I'm not going to try to be impartial in my presentations. I don't have to be fair and balanced. There's no compromise between good and evil, right and wrong, truth and lies. What part has the darkness with the light? Jesus Christ might say. We might respond, the darkness exists so that the light of the stars might shine more brightly. As a matter of fact, without the darkness, we could scarcely ever see the stars. And without this battle between truth and lies, good and evil, life and death, we could gain no victory in this life. So the evil, although it's evil indeed, serves a purpose. It gives us something to fight for. It gives us something to overcome. It gives us something to transcend in this life. And certainly the battle for life, this question concerning abortion, is one of the preeminent questions of our time. Aside from the moral and spiritual reasons that declare abortion to be abhorrent, after all, it is the taking of the life of an innocent human being. It is abhorrent, but there are very practical and compelling political and social reasons also that we ought to wake up and change the course of our history before we cease to be part of these that make up history. Well, if we don't change, we're going to disappear into the mist of past history. This is a blight and a disgrace not only on the history of the United States of America, but the history of the human race. The social and economic consequences of almost 4 decades of abortion on demand in the United States are absolutely devastating, and they are incontrovertible. We're going to go through some of these, and I hope they at least make you think about this. You know, we have had almost 4 decades to overturn this, to cast out Roe versus Wade. But because of a basic media campaign that's biased in favor of death on demand, we've had difficulty. Or perhaps we haven't been engaged enough. Perhaps the average citizen has not been in touch with reality enough to make their voices heard. A civil war was fought because a class of persons were unjustly discriminated against, because African Americans were discriminated against. They were considered to be something less than human, and now another class of human beings, the unborn, is discriminated against, considered to be something less than human. Why? Because they haven't reached a certain subjective, arbitrary, predetermined state of development, a very bad criterion for establishing whether or not someone is human. A 5-year-old child or a 10-year-old child is still human. A 6-month-old child, a 9-month-old child is still human. To use development as the criterion for establishing if it's a human being or not is absurd. There are some social and economic consequences that we have to consider. If you don't accept the religious argument, if you don't accept the moral argument, the logical argument, the rational argument then I hope you'll accept mathematics. It's pretty absolute. It's pretty predictable. Those in favor of life reproduce themselves. Those in favor of pro-death measures such as abortion ultimately cease to exist. The fertility rate since Roe versus Wade has dropped almost in half in the Western world. Since 1973, the fertility rate in the Western world has dropped almost in half. This is barely enough, or perhaps not enough at all, to even ensure replacement, much less life as we know it. Continuing. A younger friend of mine once noted, I've been saying for years that 1/3 of my generation was killed through abortion. So how is it that we can be surprised that we can't possibly support our parents' generation? If you don't believe in morality, if you don't believe in religion, then believe in mathematics, because it's absolute and it's certain. We have an increasing number of aging people passing from those that work into those that are retired or disabled or elderly. And we have a decreasing number of younger people who are there to support them. Life, as we know it, is fading away. And this holocaust of abortion is a lot of the reason why. You know, we have a radical split in the United States and in other countries as well. The terrible divisiveness that exists. One of the most divisive, if you will, things that we have is, of course, abortion. Split along party lines, liberals, conservatives, left and right, Republicans, Democrats. We have a more intense, deep division in this country than ever. But the good news is truth prevails. That's the hope. In the end, the truth will prevail. Think about it mathematically. Think about it logically. Think about it rationally, if you don't want to think about it morally. The split in politics, for instance, that exists between the Democrats and the Republicans, the liberals and the conservatives, has a mathematically guaranteed outcome. The Democrats, as a party, are going to cease to be a force through the simple operation of mathematics. They and those who constitute their base are way less likely to reproduce than their opponents on the other side of the aisle. James Taranto of the Wall Street Journal's OpinionJournal.com website, he coined a name for this phenomenon. It's called the Roe effect. If a pregnant woman chooses to have an abortion tomorrow, the result in 2029 will be one less eligible voter. Once again, mathematics asserts itself. The liberal mind is sterile, and the ideas that flow from it are sterile, assuring from within that block of folks ceasing to exist ultimately. Once again, the Roe effect. If a pregnant woman chooses to have an abortion tomorrow, the result in 2029, by the time that child would have been of voting age, results in one less eligible voter. Once again, mathematics asserts itself. Those who like to boast of their educated, sophisticated positions have at the core of the argument rejected science. You know, you can reject morality and say, oh, don't impose your morality on me. You can reject religion and say, I'm an agnostic, I'm an atheist, don't put your religion on me. Well, you're trying to put your so-called religion on someone else. You may not call it religion, but it's a position, an ideology. It's what you live by. But what they are rejecting, those who reject the argument in favor of life against abortion and other life issues, they boast that they're educated. Often they are from the educated classes. They think they're sophisticated. But their positions at the very core reject contemporary science. Science has progressed tremendously since 1973, when the decision in Roe v. Wade came down from the Supreme Court. There's no scientific doubt that life begins at conception. At the moment of conception, from the zygote on, the full genetic package is present. There is a human being in process. At 7 years of age, there's a human being in process. At conception, from the zygote on, there is a human being with great potential, not a potential human being. At the age of 7, there's not a potential human being because it isn't fully developed. There's a human being with unbounded potential. And to fail to get the difference is absolutely fatal to your position. There's no scientific doubt, none, that life begins at conception. 50 years ago, we didn't know what we know today. Last week, we didn't know what we know today. Things are in a constant state of progress, a state of change. Science makes progress. 50 years ago, we didn't know smoking killed you. So many people smoked. Everybody smoked. Fine, we didn't know. We didn't have conclusive scientific proof that smoking causes cancer, emphysema, heart problems. We know it today. 50 years ago, if you spoke, you couldn't be accused of being ignorant. Let me tell you something. You smoke today, you're nuts. What are you doing? You're denying science. You can deny everything else, but you better not deny that. Sooner or later, it'll come back to haunt you. And so we have billions and billions of dollars worth of health care because people refuse to acknowledge reality. They refuse to acknowledge smoking will make you sick, and ultimately it could kill you. With abortion, they refuse to acknowledge that it is a human being in the womb, a child. And one of the most abhorrent, outrageous blights on humanity has taken place because we refuse to acknowledge reality. In 1973, certainly, we didn't know what we know today. But science has now informed us. Life begins at conception. Some have asserted demography is destiny, and this is of great importance in the question of the social and political consequences of abortion. Demographers know that a country with a total fertility rate of less than 1.4 will lose 1/3 of its population every generation. Japan has a total fertility rate of about 1.3. This deficiency, added to one catastrophic natural disaster like the earthquake recently experienced, could mean that Japan eventually can never recover its former prowess, economic or social. The historical and projected age distribution of the United States between 1950 and 2020 is very revealing. In 1950, 8.4% of the population was age 65 or older. In 2010, 19.4% of the population was 65 and older, significantly more than double the population from 1950 to 2010. And in 2020, it's predicted that the population 65 and over will be 24% of the total population. That represents 3 times the population 65 and over since 1950, a tripling of the number of elderly people in this country. And it can be directly related to the decrease in the birth rate and the impact of abortion on demand for almost 4 decades. The support ratio, which is defined as the number of non-workers of age 65 and over per 100 workers aged 18 to 64, in this country went from 18 per 100 workers, that was in 1950, to 32 per 100 workers in 2010. In other words, in 1950, 18 retired people or elderly people had 100 workers that could provide for their support through Social Security and so forth. That almost doubled by 2010. The number of people 65 and older, 32 per 100, doubled since 1950, and by 2020, it jumps to 35 elderly persons for every 100 workers. Since 1950, the number of people over 65 being supported by the working population has almost doubled. Now add to this the number of people of working age who don't work due to unemployment, disability, or being wards of the welfare system in one manner or another. The statistics are frightening, and they're provided to us courtesy of the Bureau of the Census, U.S. Department of Commerce, the National Data Book, and Guide to Sources. If you don't believe in religion, and if you don't believe in morality, if you don't even think rationally and logically, then you better start thinking mathematically, because the mathematics of this are absolutely devastating and terrifying. Unfortunately, mathematics and science, demographics, logic, and common sense simply don't seem to be enough to convince us. Perhaps we are so selfish that we don't care what happens to our children and grandchildren. We have, in fact, contracepted ourselves into sterility and aborted ourselves into oblivion. Soon, we'll not only not have enough people to make sure the engines of society and economics run properly, we won't even have enough people to ensure our national defense. We have a decreasing number of productively employed people relative to the number who are passing out of the workforce. The rights of fathers in all this, when we talk about the debate on abortion, we concentrate on the mother, and of course the mother is the one who carries the child, but the father is equally a parent of the child. Think about the social impact concerning the rights of fathers. The rights of fathers have been totally disregarded by society and by the Supreme Court. The child is in the womb is equally the father's. Listen, in a society that is impoverished with respect to paternity, diminished with respect to paternity, at the worst possible moment in history, the court chooses to deny absolutely the rights of fathers. The child in the womb is equally the father's child. To imagine that men don't also suffer the psychological trauma from having their children killed is incredibly naive for a so-called educated, sophisticated generation. This compounded times millions has a profound effect on the character of a nation. Raising children are a gift. Children are to be considered a gift, not competition, not an obstacle. Raising children enhances the lives of both mothers and fathers. It makes for a more cohesive family, which in turn makes for a more cohesive nation. I believe men have been double penalized by not being allowed to raise their children. 25 to 30% of the time in my generation, the children have been killed through abortion. I have another theory. They haven't been drafted into the military. This is the topic of another conversation, but I'm one who's firmly convinced that the draft helped society. How did the draft help society? Well, it took any number of young men who were moved by hormones and the unrest of their age. It took them and inserted them into an environment that imposed discipline on them. It gave them discipline. It gave them education. It gave them a certain order in their lives. Then when they were reinserted into society, they brought that with them and hence built up society. So you had more discipline, and you also had a situation where men had to be more responsible. If you wanted to do an irresponsible thing and a woman got pregnant, you had to do a responsible thing. Take responsibility. Take care of her. You take care of the child. But now, society and the court has facilitated men being irresponsible. And so we reward them for being irresponsible. Soon, the United States and other countries will be radically changed in character. They're going to be more Hispanic in the United States, certainly, and that's not a bad thing. The Hispanic people are wonderful people. But they are going to be on the increase. The Anglo-Saxon people, even black people, are going to be on the decrease. Why? Because Hispanic families are more likely to have children. This isn't rocket science, folks. This is simple mathematics. Those who are disposed to have more children will do so. Those who are not will not. Who will end up voting? Who will own the country? Who will run the country? Well, that's not so bad with the Hispanic people. But what about Islam? Europe very quickly is going to be Muslim. Europe will be Muslim very soon, without an armed invasion, without a shot being fired. Muslim families reproduce at rates 4 to 5 times more than non-Muslim families in Europe. Nothing against Muslims, but your children and your grandchildren are soon going to be subjected to Sharia law and other kinds of culture shock. Why? Mathematics. If you don't believe in morality, if you don't believe in religion, if you can't think rationally or logically, you'd better start thinking mathematically, for the face of the world is changing. The head of the Vatican Bank, Ettore Tedeschi, recently said that Europe's ongoing economic crisis, and we can legitimately extend that to our own in North America, especially the United States, but that ongoing economic crisis, which, by the way, gets worse by the minute, the national debt is so out of hand in the United States as to be terrifying if you have a brain to think with. This is due to more far-reaching problems, Mr. Tedeschi says. It's due to more far-reaching problems than credit and massive national debt. That's what it appears to be. But underneath this, the true origin of the current economic crisis in Europe and elsewhere is the aging population and the low birth rate. Children are the engine of economic recovery, Mr. Tedeschi asserted. And I have to say, I agree with him. If you don't have any children, you don't have any future. If you don't have any children, you don't have any hope. He warned that an aging population and a shrinking workforce offset by mass immigration will inevitably produce social instability. And we already have a strong beginning of social instability. And it will go from bad to worse unless we take steps to remedy this situation, and abortion on demand is right at the heart of the problem. The increasing taxes that prop up Europe's welfare states have placed an unsustainable burden on young families, such that a two-income family today, relatively speaking, earns less than the same family earned 30 years ago on one income. Let me repeat that. Let it sink in. We've placed an unsustainable burden. This is in Europe, and I assure you it's coming to the United States. Despite the rhetoric of the politicians, mathematics will assert itself. The increasing taxes that prop up Europe's welfare states have placed an unsustainable burden on young families, such that a two-income family today, relatively speaking, earns less than the same family earned 30 years ago on one income. This is the result of the growth of taxes on the GDP, which doubled in the same period, precisely as a means to absorb the consequences of aging due to the decrease in births. A blunt way of putting it is that we now buy fewer cars and more medicine. Much of this crisis is due to the extremely low fertility rates in most of the affected countries. Greece, a real economic disaster area, has a fertility rate of only 1.38, when the number of children needed to sustain a stable population base in developed countries is 2.1 per woman. At the heart of the economic disaster in Greece and other countries is the low birth rate. They don't have enough people to sustain life as we know it. Countries have now begun to try to pay women to have children. Making abortion and artificial contraception illegal might soon happen, not on moral grounds, but on mathematical grounds, social and economic grounds. Younger working families may soon come to resent the burden placed on them by the government or by the older population. Pressure for euthanasia increases in such situations. So once again, my friends, if you don't accept the religious argument, if you don't accept the moral argument, if you just can't see the rationale or the logic against abortion on demand, then try to see the mathematics, because the math is irrefutable and absolute. One of the greatest and most effective champions of life and the enemy of abortion was the great Mother Teresa of Calcutta, a great saint in the Catholic Church. I had the great privilege of meeting her a short time before she passed away. And I'm going to give you some of the more notable quotes from this wonderful saint of our times. Mother Teresa said, "America needs no words from me to see how your decision in Roe versus Wade has deformed a great nation. The so-called right to choose, or the right to abortion, has effectively pitted mothers against their children and women against men. It has sown violence and discord at the heart of the most intimate human relationships. It has aggravated the derogation of the father's role in an increasingly fatherless society. It has portrayed the greatest of gifts, a child, as a competitor, an intrusion, and an inconvenience. It has nominally accorded mothers unfettered dominion over the independent lives of their dependent sons and daughters. And in granting this unconscionable power, it has exposed many women to unjust and selfish demands from their husbands or other sexual partners. Human rights are not a privilege conferred by government. They are every human being's entitlement by virtue of his or her humanity. The right to life does not depend and must not be declared to be contingent on the pleasure of anyone else, not even a parent or a sovereign." Mother Teresa also said, "I feel that the greatest destroyer of peace today is abortion, because it is a war against the child, a direct killing of the innocent child, murder by the mother herself. And if we accept that a mother can kill even her own child, how can we tell other people not to kill one another? How do we persuade a woman not to have an abortion? As always, we must persuade her with love, and we remind ourselves that love means to be willing to give until it hurts. Jesus gave even his life to love us. So the mother who is thinking of abortion should be helped in love. That is, to give until it hurts her plans or her free time, in order to respect the life of her child. The father of that child, whoever he is, must also give until it hurts. By abortion, the mother does not learn to love, but kills even her own child to solve her problems. And by abortion, the father is told that he does not have to take any responsibility at all for the child that he has brought into this world. that father is likely to put other women into the same trouble. So abortion just leads to more abortion. Any country that accepts abortion is not teaching its people to love, but rather to use any violence to get what they want. That is why the greatest destroyer of love and peace is abortion. Please, please, don't kill the child, Mother Teresa said. Please give me the child. I am willing to accept any child who would be aborted, and to give that child to a married couple who will love the child and be loved by the child. From our children's home in Calcutta alone, we've saved over 3,000 children from abortions. These children have brought such love and joy to their adopting parents and have grown up so full of love and joy. My dear friends, are we in fact better off today than we were 100 years ago? Or 50 years ago, or since 1973, when the Supreme Court declared that the unborn child has no protection? I look at my grandparents' generation, who knew the anxiety of world wars and great depressions, who had little money for non-essential items, but who often had 8 and 10 children. They didn't go hungry. They had housing. One medical emergency wouldn't wipe them out. The elderly were respected and cared for at home. Something went very wrong, my friends, along the way. Something was upset in the balance by my generation, the me generation. Something fatal happens when we do not place God first, others second, ourselves last. When we do that, things the right way, they have a way of working out. I suppose, in the end, Christians are right in listening to Christ, who said, "The last will be first, because they put others first." This is the Black Sheepdog. Until next time, may God bless you.